Welcome on in, guys. Three bold takes. And as you can see, Quinn is back with us, ladies and gentlemen. So glad to have him back. It just was not the same without him. But before we get into my overreaction, we are sponsored by SeatGeek. You can use our discount code 3boldtakes to get $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's $20 off your first purchase. Thank you, SeatGeek, for allowing us to push that and to help out our viewers of the channel. Now, my overreaction. This is the best year to initiate a 12-team playoff we've ever had. And I know it's not an overreaction, but I say this because I think it needs to be talked about. There's legitimately four teams from the SEC that could make the playoffs. There's four teams from the Big Ten that could make the playoffs. There's four teams from the ACC that could make the playoffs. And there's three teams from the Big 12 that can make the playoffs, plus the group of five representative. So that's a lot
and
of football teams. And
and
you
Notre
got
Dame.
and Notre Dame, exactly. So that's a lot of football teams that coming down. We're coming in on week 10, the first playoff rankings. This is going to be huge to see where they value certain programs at starting now. And we're gearing up for the best, I think, 4-week stretch of college, 5 weeks counting conference championships we've ever seen in this era. And I'm here for it. And all these people that talk about the 12-team playoff is going to ruin, the regular season and this and that. I think it's heightened it. I'm going to be honest with you because you've got teams for instance, we'll just use Georgia, for example, right? Like every single game is a playoff elimination game. Alabama, every single game is a playoff elimination game. Ohio State, every single game is and it's no longer the sense of and I think competitive balance within the sport has helped this, right? Quinn, you mentioned before we started that the SEC has such great competitive balance this year compared to every other conference. That's why people are losing at a higher clip than normal in the conference. And I think that's countrywide, right? Like that is all across the country. You've got Pitt that's 7-0. You've got SMU that's doing things. Like you've got Iowa State, freaking BYU. Like you've got these teams that are pulling together that we didn't anticipate happening. Could you imagine this year if we were still in a 14 playoff?
Oh,
That
it would be awful.
Think about Florida State last year thinking that they deserved it. There could have been 4 or 5, 6 teams that felt what Florida State felt last year. But this year we get the luxury of a 12-team playoff. And I think the playoffs are going to be unreal. A lot of people was saying that, yeah, 12-team playoffs cool and all, but the first couple rounds are just going to be blowouts because the top teams are going to be so much better than the others. That's not true this year, and I am so excited and I'm here for it, and I cannot wait to see what the playoff selection committee is going to do this coming up week, I guess next week, to give us a little hint on the potential for the playoff. Not an overreaction, but more so like I love it. I love where the sport's going right now.
Yeah, I'll say this. A lot of people said that it's going to devalue the regular season games, right? Because back in the old format, one loss felt like a dagger because you were like, all right, well, at least two teams are going to go undefeated most years. Usually it was only one and then the best one loss team. And then when you got to the 14 playoff, you lost more than once and it was a dagger. You were done.
Yeah.
That's not the case anymore. Like strength of schedule means a lot, and you stay in the race based on who you've beaten and who you've lost to. And there's way more teams that feel like they're in like that Alabama Missouri this past weekend felt like a huge game because both teams knew you win, your playoff chances are still there. You lose, they're shot. It's over because of the math of who Missouri had left and who they had beaten. They needed that win in Tuscaloosa, right?
Yeah.
And now, that's happening every weekend. Now, sure, there's games that don't feel that instrument like that big. Like Oregon, Ohio State was a big game, but you knew like, okay, you can lose it and nothing's really going to change as far as your
Right.
chances to make the playoff, except whoever loses it actually has pressure because Oregon can still lose a game right now, and
Mhm.
it like they're fine.
Yeah.
Ohio State They lose to Penn State, and now you start looking at their schedule and you go, well, what's your big win?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Which they also still have Indiana. So that's, who would have ever thought that we'd be
Yes.
saying Indiana, but they're having an amazing season right now in Bloomington. It's dude, this is the only pushback I'll give you, just to give some little bit of pushback. '07 maybe would have been a better year to have a 12 team playoff, because 2007 was just absolutely insane.
Well, we're creeping up
But
on the number of upsets from unranked teams and ranked teams that we had in
we
that year. So, like, we're
we
getting
are.
close to being that level of chaos.
I remember texting you guys, I think it was in week 5, and I was like, oh my goodness, it's 2007. Like, we're
Mm-hmm.
in
Yep.
2007 again. Like, but I think the difference is it's NIL. It's NIL in the transfer portal. It's what's made this much parity.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of people don't want to hear it because there's no like guardrails on it. And I do think we need to have some guardrails.
Yeah.
But overall, I mean, it's hard to argue. The proof's in the pudding. Look how much more competitive, now that we're a couple years deep into this, that the college football landscape has gotten. Because let's be real, the reason Alabama and Ohio State and Clemson and Georgia was doing right there at the end of it all, went on the tears they went on, is they hoarded all of the 5-star talent 3 band deep in every position. So you had these other teams in their own conference that were trying to go out there and beat second stringers that were better than their starters. And it just, like, the depth was there. So like, if a guy gets hurt, the guy that plugs in for him is better than your guy, and you didn't even know who he was. Like, and that those days are going away. Now, don't get me wrong, the top end teams are still deeper, but it's not to the level that it was. And then it was exacerbated by the 14 playoff, made it feel like making the playoff was end all be all. And it was the same handful of teams always making the playoffs. So they just kept getting all the talent. I think now with a 12-team playoff, that's still going to be what defines success. If you make the playoff, you had a successful year, and there's more teams that get to say they did that.
Yeah. I kind of like what you said, because I've been a big proponent of not liking the 12-team playoff. I'll start there. Chase has not liked the 12-team playoff. I didn't like any kind of playoff. I was more of a BCS kind of a guy. But Jordan Rogers did make a good point on SEC Nation leading into the Alabama game, which I'll kind of touched on. But that was a playoff eliminator game for Missouri and Alabama. And so, and I'll say this, I think the 12-team playoff this year has more energy and vibes around it than the 14 playoff ever did. I don't know why. I truly don't, because I thought the 14 playoff, you sit on your seat a little bit more because, hey, if we lose this one game, there's a chance we don't make the 14 playoff. But in the 12-team playoff, it's kind of like, okay, well, we did lose to Oregon in that game, but we can still win another one, or we can win out, or we could even lose 2 and still be in the 12. So, like, are those games still as exciting? Somehow they are, even with the chances of losing and it not having to matter as much. And I think my biggest thing for me, which I thought was funny for a lot of fans, was like, well, we want the 12-team playoff because the SEC is dominating the playoffs every year. I think that's hilarious, because I think more SEC teams are going to be probably in the playoffs this year. And I haven't heard a gripe yet. Maybe it's because it's not the end of the season. We'll probably hear it next week, actually, when the CFB playoffs come out. The rankings, the first ones come out. So we'll probably hear it then. But there's a chance, like, teams like Ole Miss, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, whatever, like Alabama with 2 losses, that's not a playoff team to me right now at all. And there's a chance that they're going to be top 10 in the playoffs. And the fact of there's going to be a couple teams that are on the outside in that are saying, hey, we deserve to be there over them. I think you might have SEC should have the most playoff teams in the 12-team playoff this year, probably. So I think that's kind of funny to me. And then lastly, the only pushback I have after watching the Notre Dame Navy game this weekend, I really hate that we're giving a spot to a group of 5 team, because I'm thinking about it as well as last year. We just saw Liberty get upset by the statistically worst team in all of football in Kennesaw State. They got upset. They were the group of 5 representative last year. And the Navy, who was probably top 5 for a lot of people, just got blown out by Notre Dame. And Notre Dame's a good team, but they're not an elite team like Georgia. Because like if Georgia doesn't win the SEC championship and they don't get the first round bye, they're probably sitting at 5. 5 is going to play that group of 5 team. I mean, are we expecting a group of 5 team, Boise State, Memphis, whoever, to play Georgia and play them well?
Let me give you a little bit of pushback on that. And I know it was only week 2, but let's be real. What G5 teams getting the bid?
It's Boise State, and they
Boise
played
State.
Oregon closer than anybody.
They played Oregon week 2 on the road and lost by a field goal. So Boise State, now Army and Navy, I'm with you. I don't think they can hang, but Boise State can.
Yep. And I think if it's teams like that, then there's a chance, right? Like, yes, they screwed the pooch and put Liberty in last year. Now, we knew that was a bad choice when it happened, right? Like, we knew that. But when you look at a team like Boise State or, somebody like that, or heck, I think even Memphis could give a team a run for their money and make a competitive game. I don't think they'd win. But I think you could see an up. Yeah, I mean, I think you could see an update.
Cincinnati, Houston, back in the days, all those teams could have done it in the early rounds. I'm not saying they would have won a title. But against some of the teams with flaws.
Exactly. So I think it's possible.
Well, and then there's another thing with the group of 5 team, because we all know why they chose Liberty. The only reason Liberty got chosen last year was because they were undefeated. And so is that something you go with this year? Boise State's already lost one, yes, to Oregon, but they've lost. Memphis, I believe, has lost by now as well. I think the only undefeated group of 5 team is Army currently.
Yep.
So, and Boise State's ranked higher currently, but do you take do you take Army because they're undefeated and put them in the group of 5? Or do you look at strength of schedule, who they lost to, and the players that they have on their team, like Boise State, and put them in?
Well, I think it's because of the fact that, and let's be real, last year there really wasn't a better, I hate to say there wasn't a better group of 5 representative, because I think there was. However, when you look at the rankings, right, like right now, Boise State is ranked so far ahead of Army, and if they both win out and are conference champions, there's going to be no debate on, well, Army's undefeated. Okay, you're right. However, Boise State is ranked higher already starting off. So I think that's going to play a lot into it, is where these initial rankings are for those teams specifically.
I think strength of schedule is also about to make it was always used kind of in the 14 playoff era, but not really. The 14 playoff was kind of easy. It was basically who are the 4 best conference champions. Sometimes Alabama and Georgia were both so good that we can't leave them out. Like that's pretty much what the 14 playoff was for its entire existence. With the 12-team playoff, you have to start taking into account strength of schedule, because record doesn't mean everything. And I think we're about to see that too. I think strength of schedule is going to be taken into effect way more now in the 12-team playoff era than it has in probably any era ever, other than the BCS, when you're trying to split hairs between 3 teams that all have the same record. So I don't really think that we're going to see an issue with the Liberty selection like we did before. And I don't think you're going to see an issue when you're starting to try to debate a 1-loss ACC team and a 2-loss SEC team. I think everyone kind of understands that SEC team played a lot more difficult games week in, week out than the ACC team did. Now, people are going to get on national media and debate the other way around, and your record is what it says you is, but everyone knows that's not true. Like, you know that. And you go ask an NFL scout how many guys are coming out of Mississippi State's roster, and then go ask them how many are coming out of Syracuse, and it's about equal, believe it or not. Like as many games as Mississippi State has dropped, you wouldn't think that, but it's the truth. And it's the same thing with like Auburn, and Auburn's trash, right? Like, so then what does it say about the higher end teams in that? And I want to point out too, I don't think the SEC is like leagues ahead of the Big Ten, but I do think those 2 are leagues ahead of everybody else. I think there's a big gap. Yeah, like there's a big gap after that. There's still teams at the top end that are good that can hang with them. Like I think a Miami can hang with anybody. But year in, year out, the ACC from top to bottom isn't going to be that deep.
Yeah. Well, Hey, this has been a great discussion so far. We're almost at the 15-minute mark, which is awesome for us and to be able to talk, and it does not feel like it just flies by. Guys, let us know down below what you guys think about it. Is this the perfect year for the 12-team playoff to be introduced? Is there a year in previous that we're overlooking? Do you still hate the idea of the 12-team playoff? Just let us know down below what you think about that. I'm Freddie. I've been joined by Chase and Quinn. Remember our partners over at SeatGeek. Use our code 3BoldTakes to get $20 off your first purchase. 3BoldTakes at SeatGeek at checkout. Thanks, guys. We will see you in the next one. We've got predictions coming up for the rest of these games, and I'm super excited to watch the last 4 weeks of college football.